Assalamu alaikum. This is Hena Zuberi, and you're watching Muslim Network News. Our top story tonight is about the refugee cap reversal by President Joe Biden. The White House announced last night that the US President Joe Biden has set a cap of 62,500 refugees will be allowed into the United States for the rest of this year. This is an increase of more than 45,000 from a historic low of 15,000 under former President Donald Trump. Biden said that policy did not reflect America's value as a nation that welcomes and supports refugees. The announcement came as a surprise, as the White House had said several weeks ago that would keep the number of refugees allowed at 15,000. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, there are more than 25 million refugees across the globe as of mid 2020. As US President Joe Biden prepares to update the country on how it's faring in the battle against COVID 19 today, he said yesterday that herd immunity seems unlikely at the moment. Following remarks made at a Virginia community college, Biden said he was not sure what percentages of Americans would be immune to the virus because of vaccination or previous exposure to the disease. Experts, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, estimate that between 70 to 85% of the population needs to be immune to the virus to control its spread. Biden urged all Americans to get vaccinated.
Every single person, 16 years or older, doesn't have to wait in line, can show up and get a vaccination now. My plea to everyone, get vaccinated now, please. Thank you.
So far, over 44% of the population has received at least one dose of the COVID vaccine, and over 31% are fully vaccinated, according to the US Center for Disease Control and Prevention. But hurdles to herd immunity remain. Vaccine hesitation has taken hold in places like the Chicago Police Department, where only 27% of officers have been vaccinated. Some officers hesitate due to fear of side effects. The end of COVID restrictions in states like Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis signed an executive order yesterday, also add to these hurdles. Your refrigerator could be contributing to climate change. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, on Monday announced rules to phase out chemicals that cool fridges, which are warming the planet. Hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, are found in fridges, freezers, and air conditioners around the world. They can be hundreds or thousands of times more powerful than carbon dioxide in their ability to warm the planet and lead to climate change. Getting rid of HFCs worldwide would avoid 0.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. The UN Paris Climate Agreement aims to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The new rules would reduce manufacturing and importation of HFCs by 85% over the next 15 years. The EPA said the ban would result in over $200 billion in health and environmental benefits by 2050. The Kigali Amendment is a treaty to eliminate HFCs globally. Former US President Donald Trump continues to claim last November's presidential election is fraudulent. He called it a big lie in a statement yesterday. Trump lost the election by more than 7 million votes in the popular vote count. He also lost by a 306 to 232 margin in the Electoral College, which determines the final outcome. His comment led to some Republicans, like Liz Cheney of Wyoming, to censure him on Twitter for turning their back on the rule of law and poisoning America's democratic system. Trump has promised to endorse any Republican candidate who runs against Cheney in next year's congressional elections. Trump lost dozens of court challenges to the election outcome. However, he never formally conceded defeat to Biden, leaving Washington, D.C. a few hours before Biden's inauguration on January 20th. Trump has suggested he might run again for the presidency in 2024. In international news, Burma's Kachin Independence Army said it had shot down a military helicopter on Monday as fighting in the country's northern and eastern frontier area intensified. The violence follows weeks of protests after a February 1st coup in which the country's military ousted democratically elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Local media also reported that a military appointed local administrator had been stabbed to death in the city of Yangon. According to the advocacy group Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, at least 765 civilians have been killed by the military since the coup. Tens of thousands of civilians have fled their homes to escape fighting between the military and insurgents based along Burma's border, according to the United Nations. Sheikh Ali Amini was shot dead during evening prayers in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Many armed groups have instigated attacks in the country, including Daesh. They are remnants of conflicts in the region that took place in the 1990s. 12% of Congo's population is Muslim, and they face discrimination. According to the United Nations, over 2,000 civilians were killed by armed groups in the country last year. Israeli settlers attacked a Palestinian village in the occupied West Bank on Monday, setting brushfires and throwing stones. Dozens of settlers attacked the village of Jalud, according to Israeli human rights group B'Tselem. The group said Israeli security forces arrested 11 Palestinians and 4 people were wounded by rubber bullets. Israeli settlers attacked Palestinian communities in response to perceived Israeli plans to restrict their illegal settlement activities or retaliatory violence from Palestinians whose land they seek to take over. B'Tselem and Human Rights Watch declared Israel guilty of apartheid earlier this year. Intellectuals across India have written to Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Union Agriculture Minister Narendra Tomar to invite striking farmers for dialogue immediately. Civil society members also appealed to the leadership of an umbrella group of farmer unions to agree to sit down to negotiations if the government offers them. Over the last 6 months, Indian farmers started protesting against 3 new agricultural laws that they say threaten their livelihoods. They promised to continue their daily sit-in demonstrations despite a deadly surge of COVID in the country. The last meeting between farmers and the government was held on January 22nd. It ended in a deadlock, which continues. Since April, India has become the country most hit by COVID. COVID-19 has devastated India with nearly 20 million cases. How is India coping with this challenge? More on this by Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk.
India has set another global record in new COVID-19 cases and deaths. This record-setting pandemic is fueled by a series of super spreader events in the country. The Kumbh Mela itself had brought 3.5 million Hindus to this religious festival with no social distancing or masks. Moreover, Prime Minister Narendra Modi himself rallied millions during his election campaign. Scientists currently predict a peak in the pandemic is near. Hospitals also have no beds, and if you need oxygen, you need to buy it for yourself since hospitals are experiencing a dire shortage of oxygen tanks. If you look around on social media for an oxygen cylinder, you risk being arrested. India's second wave is causing bodies to pile up for cremation. Bodies are appearing faster than workers are able to build new pyres for them. Families are also being forced to receive a number and wait in line for their turn, as dozens of workers are busy constructing new cremation platforms from bricks and mortar. Gravediggers in India are also working around the clock to bury COVID victims. In Mumbai, the gravediggers are working on 24-hour shifts to accommodate the rising demand. In the meantime, the world is rushing to help India with the oxygen cylinders and other oxygen-related supplies.
6 years of war in Yemen has left millions hungry, facing the worst famine in years. How do Yemenis survive Ramadan in the midst of bullets and bombs? Here's a report by Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk exploring this.
This war-torn nation of almost 30 million people is divided between political and sectarian lines. Despite this, there is a commonality that unites them all, and more visible during the holy month of Ramadan, that endearing thing is actually food, in particular sweets and samosas. This is known as a famous hot spot for buying the best sweets in town. Isa El-Shabi says, the sambusa is a beautiful food and it tastes delicious, especially so during this blessed month.
هذه السمبوسة غذاء جميل وطعمها لذيذ خاصة في هذا الشهر الكريم ويتنافسون عليها الشعب اليمني جميعا خاصة في وقت الإفطار.
The sambusa, stuffed with vegetables or meat, is found across the Middle East. In fact, the Arab sambusa is a cousin of the South Asian samosa. In Yemen, they are a much-loved tradition. In the capital city of Sana'a, streets bustle with Muslims buying tasty treats before iftar, the break of fast. For Yemenis, crispy sambusa, spongy rawani, or syrupy baklawa are at the heart of the Ramadan experience. Unfortunately, the deep economic crisis in Yemen is making the price of this national favorite out of the reach for many.
After these reports, coming up next is our in-depth analysis segment. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages.
So it's nothing extraordinary what we do. It's just a human to human, like brothers to brothers and sisters to sisters. Nothing else, nothing more.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid, walking up and down the world's largest refugee camps. I met Sister Fatima. Well, I'm calling her a sister. She was just a teenage girl, my granddaughter's age. Her parents were slaughtered by the Burmese military, and she was dragged by the Burmese soldiers to their hut, and all night long she was violated. She lost consciousness. When she regained, and in the morning and soldiers were themselves away, she ran and hid in a vegetable patch. Some people saw her, gave her clothes, and took her 4-day-long walk to Bangladesh. Who will speak up for her? Who will stand up for her if not you and I? It's our responsibility. It's our duty, brothers and sisters in humanity. And that's why I like you to support Burma Task Force. I'm a volunteer for it. But Burma Task Force is standing up to stop this genocide, violation of our sisters. You and I are free, they are not. Please stand up, work with Burma Task Force, and donate today to Burma Task Force. Together, we can do it. Assalamu alaikum.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
In yesterday's show, we shared a story about Muslims in one Boston suburb who were spearheading a food drive in Ramadan with the help of all the area's public schools, a church, and a synagogue. To talk about this in detail, Saleha Farouk is with the founder of this group. Over to you, Saleha.
I really do appreciate that, Hena. Today we're speaking with the founder of Milton Muslim Neighbors, Tahira Ghareya. Right now, the organization are focused on a interesting food drive during this holy month of Ramadan. When speaking with Tahira, we'll learn more about her efforts through her nonprofit charity effort today, as well as how she got the help of her local community engaged, particularly when it comes to the public schools and other faith-based organizations in the Milton area. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Tahira.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Wa alaikum salam. If you could just tell us a little bit about your organization, the Milton Muslim Neighbors, and particularly what was the catalyst for you and your team to decide to run this food drive during this month?
A very good question. So we, the Milton Muslim Neighbors are essentially just a group of Muslim families that live in the town of Milton, which is a suburb of Boston. And the genesis of this is a lot of sort of my observations and interaction with the greater Milton community. And I was elected as a town meeting member back in 2019. As the more interaction, and I'm a recent transplant from California, the more I was interacting with my neighbors and my friends and within the school district and in the town, I just felt like there was a little bit of a void of the Muslim engagement. And as I sort of engaged with the Milton community, sort of talked about what the needs were, what the gaps were, what we as Muslims also wanted to bring to bear and share about who we are and the presence that we had in the town of Milton, just sort of made sense. So in February of 2020, I was in partnership with the interfaith community as well as the town select board discussing of having the first ever communal iftar. And this is around February 2020. And as we all know the rest of the story, the pandemic occurred, the lockdown happened, and that plan did not come to fruition. Instead, we formed the Milton Muslim Neighbors. The Milton community really came together as neighbors, and there's roughly 15, 20 plus families, maybe even more that I'm unaware of. We decided to sort of converge and communicate together and keep in touch over the course of the pandemic. So the idea really kind of birthed out of that in how do we share who we are, how do we represent our community and our faith within Milton, how do we partner and build bridges with others. And so, fast forward to this year, it just kind of made sense that, we cannot still hold in-person iftars with the volume that would end up happening, but instead engage folks in a Ramadan food drive. So that's kind of the, how should I say, the origin story of how we came to be as a community. And I, sort of asked folks to sort of come on board and what they thought. Everybody sort of hands down wanted to participate. Of course, many of us have students in the school district. And when I pitched this idea, which actually ironically came from my 6-year-old daughter who said, I know we can't have iftars and I really miss going to the masjid and, Mama, what can we do? And we talked about that, and she said, how about a food drive? She had read about it in one of her books, and it's a Muslim female character who holds a food drive in her community. And that was kind of the genesis. I pitched it to the group. The group was ecstatic about it. And then we moved on to actually creating some formal partnership with the town, the school district, the Interfaith Council, to see how we can make this happen. We're currently underway. The last day of the food drive is Monday, May 10th. And so everybody kind of, came together, including the little ones and the grown-ups. And so it's been a beautiful experience thus far.
Wonderful, and I appreciate you sharing the story of how the idea actually came from your daughter. Sometimes children really do have the best of ideas, and it just takes a quick moment for us to listen to them. I wanted to touch upon where you're actually located. It seems like Milton is a small town in Massachusetts. And as you currently are representing a Muslim faith-based organization, why was it important for you to reach out to other faith groups? I know that you work with churches and synagogues. And what was it like in your process of engaging them in the work that you do?
Absolutely. So the town of Milton is, I would say, roughly 10 miles south of the city of Boston. It's a small little suburb. So right outside of Boston, roughly 27,000 population. Not a large city, but we are right outside and borders a lot of very busy and densely populated communities. And so in that way, it is very sort of diverse. It is, on the other hand, unique that it is a quiet little community and has a lot of schools and a lot of sort of people from all over. So the partnership really came to be because, to be truthful, and my experience, I think, as a young person, as a college student, as a professional, I have always been of the mind that the best way to get anything accomplished is to create a sense of community and coalitions and partners. And if we want to share who we are and also learn about others, of course, the best way also is to break bread, which is why we love to invite people over for iftar during Ramadan and share the beautiful experience of Ramadan, both with our Muslim friends as well as our non-Muslim friends. And so this kind of was a no-brainer, to be honest with you. It made absolute sort of immediate sense to me that this is obviously bigger than us. This is not just simply about a bunch of Muslims getting together and doing a food drive, that we have something to share. No, this year we cannot break bread together and share the other beautiful aspects of Ramadan, but we can certainly invite people and young people, especially within the school district, to figure out a way, how can they connect with the larger humanity? How can they also practice empathy and compassion and love for the fellow human being? And you don't have to be Muslim for that. But if you want to partner with your, experience what your Muslim classmate or Muslim colleagues in town are doing, this is a beautiful way to sort of participate and give back. And now with the pandemic, we all know and are very much familiar with the food insecurity many of our friends and our neighbors are undergoing. And so what a wonderful way, again, than to partner with the interfaith community and partner with the school district and the town to collect food and benefit a pantry. And we partnered with the Interfaith Social Services Pantry, who was more than happy, more than eager and excited to partner. In terms of partnering with our Jewish friends and neighbors and our Christian friends and others, again, they welcomed us with open arms. We pitched the idea. They said, absolutely, count us in. Put bins in our churches, put bins in our synagogues. I actually, as a matter of fact, this morning, that's what I was doing. It's currently, nearly 4 p.m. Eastern time here in Boston. I spent a portion of my time with my preschool child running to various schools and the faith centers, picking up donations and dropping off to the pantry. And I must say, it's such a wonderful feeling that I cannot sort of articulate well, to be able to sort of, visually experience sort of the buckets and bins that are full, and the kids who took pride in bringing it to school and feeling like they're contributing, that they're giving. And I was simply a vehicle to pick it up and take it to the pantry. But it's a really sort of wonderful way to connect with the community, a great way to share. And that has opened up a lot of doors of people that I do not know, communities and families that I'm not aware of, Muslim and non-Muslim, who've actually emailed me, called me, texted and saying, how can I get involved? Or I didn't know that Milton Muslim Neighbors exist. Can I participate? So not too long ago, maybe roughly a week or so, it hasn't been long, we launched a Facebook page allowing folks in our town, again, we're a small town of 27,000 people, but anyone who wants to participate and join us, everyone is welcome. So that we're able to have the conversations we need to have so that the neighbors can get to know one another. We live together. So if we live together, we want to learn to play well together and do business well together. And what better way than during the month of Ramadan to launch this?
Wonderful. And thank you so much for bringing in a little bit of your experience being on the front lines and doing that work and noticing things around you, which brings me to my next question. I'm sure you've realized that, unfortunately, the pandemic has been an obstacle for actually so many similar community service organizations, food banking services, and various nonprofit services and programs in general. How, in your perspective, has COVID-19 caused challenges in your work at Milton Muslim Neighbors?
So at this point, I have to be honest and forthcoming that Milton Muslim Neighbors is a relatively new endeavor, and it's a volunteer endeavor. It just basically my vision of bringing people together and connecting and sharing. So it's very new. It's in its infancy. And And largely, again, it was to create that bridge building sort of opportunity between the Muslims and our neighbors around us. And that what really opened my eyes was serving on the town meeting as a town meeting member, as an elected member, and a visible Muslima. I noticed I was having a lot of folks reach out to me and ask if there were more of us and what were we doing, what were we up to, and had a real hunger to connect with Muslim neighbors. So part of it was that. Part of it was also because of COVID and because of the pandemic and being on lockdown, hearing not just in the mainstream media, the horrifying news we saw all across the country and now around the world, and what we're seeing in India play out live as we're speaking in this conversation. Also recognizing and understanding that there are people right here in my neighborhood, in my immediate vicinity, who have lost their jobs, who are on the verge of losing their homes. And this is a rather, affluent community. And yet it doesn't matter who you are, what color of your skin, your race or creed, or any of those things. We all, when it comes to the basic necessities, we all need food and shelter. And the pandemic really showed the side of our sort of humanity, I think, as Americans and as Muslims, and also highlighted and showcased the sheer inequities that exist also within our community. So it just, again, made complete sense. All of us are having the same conversations. We're feeling the same feelings. How can we come together and be more unified in helping our neighbors? So it was all the convergence of many of those things, from the pandemic to the national conversation around health inequities, race injustice, and all of Islamophobia, you name it, the rise in Asian hate crimes. There's so much going on in our society, right here in our neighborhoods and in our nation. And sometimes we get so stuck talking about what's happening in the world, as we should be aware, don't get me wrong. And we get stuck with having, on the national conversation and what's happening here and what's happening there. I have always been of the mind, and have been raised that first, let's think about what's happening in our neighborhood. Is our neighbor okay? Do they have enough food to eat? And so immediately, and I am one of those who comes into a neighborhood when I move in. I want to know the neighbors, two neighbors to the right of me, two neighbors to the left of me. They come over and eat, and we have barbecues. And that's when I moved into Milton 3 or 4 years ago. That's what I did. And so this is just a natural extension of that for me and for my family. It's just that I'm not the only one. There's many who feel this way, many who believe this way, many who want to do something in Ramadan, not just have an iftar with our neighbors, but do Ramadan food baskets, to doing a Ramadan food drive, sharing treats with our frontline workers and our town staff, making presentations in front of local town councils, to writing in the local paper and sharing. If we don't talk about it and share it, we are not going to be adequately represented, and folks will not know that we exist. So part of, I think, combating a lot of the negative discourse that we hear is starting local, starting in our homes and in our neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you so much for that comprehensive background into your work. I just wanted to take a couple of minutes in the remaining time that we have to ask you to share a couple of ways that people can help your cause. I know that you mentioned that you're relatively new, but whether you are currently fundraising or whether somebody can make a donation either online, do let us know where those avenues are for your organization.
Absolutely. So we are not currently accepting donations. What I am accepting are du'as and good deeds by everybody. And what I mean by that, it is, the last 10 days of Ramadan. I understand that people have many things they want to give to and donate to. What my ask and my encouragement to all is, no idea is too small, right? Start somewhere. Don't be, I think so much has happened in our communities sometimes, and along religious lines and ethnic lines, that we become very insular. We become a little scared and afraid, and we sort of get stuck in our silos and hanging out with just people who look like us, talk like us, or eat the same kind of food.
Sure.
Challenging ourselves to step out of the box to get to really know our neighbors and the community we live in. What are the issues facing the school districts? What are the issues facing law enforcement and fire and other, our Black and brown neighbors? Like, what's happening? How can we we have so many ideas and gifts to give, as well as financial gifts. That's my first ask. The second is there are so many pantries across the nation who are in dire need of goods and services, and especially food, dry food, to even diapers for very young children. That's that's an expense that many families oftentimes cannot afford. Look into those, see what you can give. And many of us have things that we haven't thought about, and maybe we don't know families who need it immediately. But there are massages and there are pantries, both that you can plug into, so you have ways to sort of give back and get the kids involved. The kids will love going to the grocery store and putting in things that they want to sort of donate, or put things in a bag and take it to their school or take it to a pantry. I've had much feedback about how fulfilling and rewarding the youth felt, like that they too were big enough to do something. Like, we all have a part to play. So that's my real ask. Alhamdulillah, we are in a community that's very blessed. We just want to share our blessings with others.
Wonderful words of wisdom from Tahira Gharaya from the Milton Muslim Neighbors. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, all the way from Massachusetts.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
Welcome salam. Thank you so much for being with us today, and back to Hena Zuberi in the newsroom.
Thank you, Saleha. Before moving on to our next in-depth analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone. The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
Friends, our world is pulling together like never before. We're making huge sacrifices to keep one another safe. Scientists are working non-stop to develop COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. A vaccine will get our economies moving. It will tell our loved ones we're safe again. But we have challenges we must address. Right now, huge pharmaceutical companies are keeping the vaccine research a secret. They're deciding how many vaccines get made, how much to charge for them, and who gets vaccinated. This will no doubt leave billions of people behind. Pharma companies are putting profit, not people, first. Yet, billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is funding their work. We cannot let the CEOs of a handful of pharmaceutical companies decide our future. We need a vaccine that everyone can have free of charge, no matter where you live or whether you're rich or you're poor. We need companies to share all their research so we can make enough safe vaccines for everyone. We need a vaccine owned by all of us. To end this COVID-19 pandemic, We need to pull together once more.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. President Joe Biden has completed 100 days in office. What do the people of the United States in general think about that? And the state of New Hampshire in particular think about him? To discuss this in detail, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. 100 days of President Biden are done. How does America feel about it? More than America, how people in New Hampshire feel about that. And to discuss that with us is Professor Andrew Smith, who takes care of doing survey of New Hampshire and New England. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you very much for having me.
So how New Hampshire is feeling about President Biden's first 100 days?
Well, people in New Hampshire are feeling pretty much like the country is as a whole. Nationwide, President Biden is enjoying about 53% job approval rating. In New Hampshire, it's 51 to 52%, so very similar. We're seeing the same sort of partisan divide here than we have seen in the country under last several presidents. Among Democrats, well over 95% approve of the job that Biden is doing. Among Republicans, it's the opposite. It's downwards around 10% of Republicans approve the job that he's doing. This is very similar, although inverted, from the kind of numbers that we saw under President Trump, where in New Hampshire and nationwide, 85 to 90% of Republicans approved of the job that Trump was doing, but only single digits of Democrats approved of the job that he's doing. So this partisanship that's been going on now for at least 20 years, very hard partisanship, is continuing under President Biden.
Does it change anyway when you look at the younger people?
Well, younger people are giving Biden higher job approval ratings than they were giving to President Trump, particularly here in New Hampshire. But that's in large part because younger people are identifying as Democrats. They grew up when President Obama was in office. He was generally seen as being a successful president by most people, certainly in the press. And then with President Trump, his press coverage was extremely negative. I think some of the analyses that I've seen showed him having essentially 90% negative to 10% positive press coverage. So younger people who generally don't pay as much attention to politics, then aren't as engaged in politics, are more reliant on what they hear in the press to make those decisions about how they support, who they support and not. And that's likely to be a relatively have a long-term impact on their lives, because if they grow up under a president who seems to be popular, they're much more likely to consider themselves a member of that party for the rest of their lives. And if the president is unpopular, they're much less likely to go with that president's party.
What I'm trying to understand is that if the younger generation is less partisan as compared to the older generation, do they differ on issue to issue basis? On certain issue, they will rate differently than the other issue. For example, they might rate highly on climate issue. Are you asking those variables?
Yes, we've asked a lot of questions about climate issues, and younger people tend to be much more in favor of significant policy changes that deal with climate change than our older people. There's certainly a partisan divide on that issue, but younger people have grown up in an era where that has been talked about fairly extensively, not only in their college days, but in their school days. And it's certainly an issue that is of much greater importance, visibility to them than it is to older people who come up in a period where there were many, many other issues that were more important at the time. So the partisan divide is still there, but I think the thing that's really important to point out is that younger people just aren't as partisan yet, because until you get to be about 30, 35 years old, younger people just don't engage in politics as much. They don't vote as often. They don't follow politics as much, and their opinions aren't as firmly set as older people's are.
Are the younger people, how many younger people in New Hampshire consider themselves a part of Republican Party?
Well, it's fairly small. In our polling, we look at people that are under 30 years old, so 18 to 30. Only about 25 to 30% consider themselves Republicans. About 35 to 40% consider themselves Democrats, and the rest are in the middle, independent, they would say. And what I would interpret that is, and you can look at this by their awareness of issues and so forth. This is those people, those young people that are independent, really are the ones that just aren't engaged in politics much at all.
So these Republicans and independent essentially constitute a larger number than the Democrats. Do they show flexibility issue by issue, or they are showing the hardening of the partisan divide?
I think as they get older, they see the hardening of the partisan divide. I think that's one of the phenomena that we've seen in U.S. politics really developing over the last 20 years in particular, but it even goes back further than that. People look to parties for their cues as to whether they should support or oppose particular policy issues. When a new issue comes up, and particularly in foreign policy, where Americans are pretty ignorant about what's going on in much of the rest of the world, we have to figure out what our parties say about how we should think about those issues. Then we tend to rationalize and justify our own position based on what our parties tell us.
Now, tell me this, independent in the national poll seems to have quite a bit of appreciation of President Biden's first 100 days. How many independents are there? What type of significance in New Hampshire do they have?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because how we define independence makes a big difference, and how we do it as pollsters can make a big difference in assessing how big that block is. If you just, in New Hampshire, you can be registered as a Republican, a Democrat, or undeclared. We tend to call those people who are registered undeclared independent, and they make up the block, the biggest block of voters here. That's about 42% are registered undeclared, or as we call them, independent. But if you look at them, that particular group more closely, the great majority of them, about 75 to 80%, are either Republicans or Democrats in their attitudes about politics. So what we term independence really can determine these factors about how large that group is, even as much as the kind of polling questions that we use. Gallup has been asking a question, do you generally consider yourself a Republican, Democrat, or independent, going back to the 1930s? And they typically get roughly 1/3 Democrat, 1/3 Republican, and 1/3 independent. But if you unfold, that is, take those people who initially say they're independents, then ask them which party did they lean towards, well, that percentage typically drops down to 15 or 20%. So people hold their partisan leanings. They may be less partisan a little bit, but they hold those partisan leanings. That's typically how they behave politically.
How those independents are viewing President Biden's first 100 days?
They're generally approving of them, certainly nowhere near as much as Democrats are. We're seeing in our polling 45 to 50% of independents approve of the job that Biden's doing. So it's roughly split, a little bit lower than the overall percentage, but that overall percentage is so high simply because Democrats are pretty unanimous in support of Biden.
Now, people who care for climate in New Hampshire, I want to understand how, climate change has become a partisan issue. I don't know how it came to become like that, because scientists don't have much of a difference of opinion there, but it has become a partisan issue. How is New Hampshire in that area? Are there people who care for climate across the party line?
There are. New Hampshire's Republicans tend to be more moderate, what we would call Rockefeller Republicans after old Nelson Rockefeller. They tend to be more moderate and they are not as I would say not as conservative. They're not as ideologically conservative as our Republicans in other parts of the country. Climate change is an issue here. Particularly, it's an economic issue in New Hampshire. We have quite a big ski industry in the mountains. We also have a relatively short but very important coastline here that's having increasing flooding and so forth. So it is an issue here, but it's an economic issue, and it does somewhat cut across parties. We're not seeing that as hard of a partisan divide here as we have it in other parts of the country.
Well, that's something very unique about the state then, because it doesn't seems to be the case all over. So is it reflecting in long-term policies of the state of New Hampshire when it comes to climate change, because there is no hard opposition to it?
Well, we've seen the state and particularly towns in New Hampshire actively engaged in alternative energy plans. So a lot of solar plans. There's plans for offshore windmills going up. There's windmills on a lot of the mountain ridges up in the northern part of the state. But a lot of those things are things that the towns have done. Towns in the state have done independent of the state government. Obviously, there's some state regulations and so forth that they have to go through in order to put those plans in. But we've seen quite a bit of development of alternative energy sources. We've also had some issues that have been somewhat divisive. There was a big alternative energy source in Canada with hydropower that's generated from lakes in Quebec. And there was a proposal to build a large power line down through New Hampshire to bring that hydropower down here. But that was really defeated by the same kind of environmentalists that one would think would be in favor of that because for other reasons, because it was concerned about coming through the mountains, cutting down forests and so forth to run these power lines through. So it is a varied issue. We're currently also seeing a lot of pushback, even among environmentalists, about wind generated power because of the noise of the windmills and some degradation they've been doing to wildlife, particularly birds up in the mountains. So we're seeing some pushback in those areas, which I think as a lot of these technologies develop out and become more common, we're going to see that they're going to be things that aren't as popular about them in practice as it was in theory.
It seems that towns are ahead of the state and the federal government. Because of what reason? It's a popular demand, it's a public opinion. Why towns are ahead in this game?
Well, there's popular demand, and particularly the towns that are most aggressively pushing these tend to be Democratic towns. There is some public opinion, obviously, in those areas. New Hampshire is also part of a regional energy consortium of states in New England in which they are encouraged or required to put back a certain amount or generate a certain amount of their electricity and power from renewable sources. And New Hampshire has been, towns in New Hampshire have been taking advantage of those grants to put in town-based solar panel arrays. And the University of New Hampshire, for example, has used some of those grants to build a methane heat generating plant using methane that comes from a local landfill. So there's a lot of these little interesting ways of doing it. Also, New Hampshire is a small state in terms of its state government. We have no income tax, we have no sales tax, which means there's not the kind of revenues at the state government to incent towns or individuals to do these sorts of things or engage in this sort of policy change, as you see in other states, which have much, much larger budgets to play with.
There was a lot of back and forth about the survey research and public opinion and the exit polling What changes that discipline of public opinion research has made after all of those strange results, which were very different from what exit polls were saying?
Well, I'm on the task force for the American Association of Public Opinion Research, and we're just finishing up a report that will be released, I think, next week or the week after, looking at what happened with the polls in 2020. And it's very difficult to see, but I think it's very difficult to come up with a specific answer. But what we were seeing, the most plausible reason that we're seeing is why the pre-election polls were overestimated Biden support, and in particular underestimated Trump support, is what we would call differential non-response. That means that Republicans, and in particular Trump supporters, were less likely to participate in surveys. And when they were on the phone with us or filling them out online, however they were completed, because there was no mode difference to speak of, but however they were doing it, they were less likely to say that they were actually going to vote for Trump. This is it goes back to an interesting theory by a German public opinion researcher named Elisabeth Noelle Neumann, and she titled this "The Spiral of Silence." And the theory is based on the idea that humans we're social animals. We don't want to be cut out of a group. So if we perceive a political candidate to be less popular, we are less likely to talk about that candidate, certainly less likely to talk about our support for that candidate, less likely to put a sign in our yard or put a bumper sticker on our car, and also less likely to talk with researchers about our support for that candidate. So the best thing that we can see right now, the main reason that I think we're seeing this underestimation of support for Trump, both in 2020 and in 2016, is that Republicans just aren't talking to pollsters as much. And that's not surprising, because Donald Trump has spent the last 5 years or so talking about fake polls and fake news. And most of the major polling organizations are media-based organizations. And it's not surprising, in my view, that a lot of Republicans who are Trump supporters are saying, well, I'm just not going to talk. We're not going to participate in your project.
Thank you so much, Professor Andrew Smith from the University of New Hampshire. Truly appreciate you being with us.
It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid and Andrew Smith. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Keep watching Muslim Network TV. For more, visit our website, muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.
Special thanks to our official supporter, Zagat Foundation of America.